Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah believe that all the Sahaba are udul. They are upright and adil, and all of them are Ahlul Jannah. Many of Sunni scholars use certain Quranic verses to show that all the Sahaba have been accorded the best of honors by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are many verses. Most of them are of very general nature. It would apply to the first generation Muslims as well as to us who came 1400 years after the beginning of the Qur'an. However, the most famous verse which is used by the Sunni scholars to support their views is actually the verse which was revealed in the context of the event of Hudaibiya.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.
This latter name, Bay'atul Ridwan, is derived from Surah Al-Fath, Surah number 48, Ayat 18, which the Sunni ulama actually use as the strongest support for their view about the Sahaba in general. What does this ayat say? And this is what I would like to discuss tonight. In this ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ يُبَايِعُونَكَ تَحْتَ الشَّجَرَةِ. Allah was certainly pleased with the believers when they swore allegiance to you under the tree. فَعَلِمَ مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ فَأَنزَلَ السَّكِينَةُ عَلَيْهِمْ. He knew what was in their hearts, so He sent down composure on them, tranquility on them, and وَآتَاهُمْ فَتْحًا قَرِيبًا, and He requited them with a victory near at hand. Now this ayat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that Allah was pleased with the mu'mineen when they were doing bay'at, this is used by the Sunni ulama to say that Allah was pleased with all those Sahaba who did bay'at of Rasulullah in Hudaibiya. Then of course they also extend that for all Sahaba, or even those who were not there. From the Shi'a perspective, first of all, this ayat does not cover all the companions of the Prophet, nor is it a lifetime guarantee of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ridha of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for those who had done bay'at at that time. I would like to deal and discuss this ayat with 6 comments that I would like you to pay attention to these issues. Number 1, the first comment that I have is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this ridha, the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it actually is restricted. The very first restriction is لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with the mu'mineen, with the believers. What it means is that it does not extend to the hypocrites who were there and who did the bay'at. This is where many of our Muslim scholars don't even talk about it. Take the example of Abdullah bin Ubay, a very well-known figure in Medina who was a hypocrite, known by Shia and Sunni historians as a munafiq. He was also present in Hudaybiya. He also did bay'at on the hand of Rasulullah. And you can see this in Al-Aini's book, which is known as Umdatul Qari, which is a commentary of Sahih Bukhari, as well as in Ibn Hazm's book Al-Muhalla, also in the Sirah Nabawiyya of Al-Halabi, and even in Imam Suyuti's Tafsir Ad-Durr al-Mansur. They talk about the presence of Abdullah bin Ubay there doing bay'at on the hand of Rasulullah. So my question is, was Allah pleased with Abdullah bin Ubay, who was known to be a munafiq? Even they will say, Sunni scholars will say, no, not at all, because he was a munafiq, so he cannot be included in this ayat. And that is the point I have, that this verse cannot cover all those who were present in the bay'at, let alone all other Sahaba who were not there at that time in Hudaybiya. The second point about this ridha and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that it is also restricted by time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ أنا المؤمنين إذ يبايعونك تحت الشجرة. Allah is certainly pleased with the believers when they swore allegiance to you. This word إذ, which is translated as when, this shows that the rida of Allah was at that moment when the mu'mineen were pledging allegiance to the Prophet. It was not a lifetime assurance or guarantee that Allah is pleased with them for their whole life in whatever they do. This was not a blank check for Jannah for all the Sahaba. Coming on to the third point that I have here is that even this pledge of allegiance was conditional. And for this again, I'm not going to history, I'm going to Surah Al-Fath, the same Fath surah which has this ayat about لَقَدْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. In Surah number 48, there is an ayat number 10 which was before this, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this pledge of allegiance, and He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُبَايِعُونَكَ إِنَّمَا يُبَايِعُونَ اللَّهَ يَدُ اللَّهَ فَوْقَ أَيْدِيهِمْ. Verily those who pledge allegiance to you, O Muhammad, they pledge allegiance only to Allah. So now even putting your hand on the hand of Rasulullah is like as if you are putting your hand symbolically in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yadullah fawqa aydihim. Allah's hand was above their hands. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something very powerful. He says, فَمَنْ نَكَثَ فَإِنَّمَا يَنْكُثُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. And so whoever breaks his pledge, breaks it on to his own detriment. Anybody who violates this pledge, he violates it at his own loss. وَمَنْ أَوْفَى بِمَا عَاهَدَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. And whoever fulfills the pledge that he has made with Allah, سَيُؤْتِيهِ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. Allah will grant him a great reward. So this ayat, which is about Sulh Hudaibiya, the bay'at which was done, is very clear that this pledge of allegiance was conditional. What it means that if any of those Sahaba who pledged their allegiance to Rasulullah on that day, if they break their pledge, then the rida and pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will no more be with that person. Ibn Kathir in his Tafsir, Az-Zamakhshari in his Tafsir, and many others actually say that the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala depends on fulfilling the pledge and not violating it. And so this ayat number 10 from Surah Al-Fath clarifies that this issue of the rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not a lifetime guarantee for those Sahaba who had done the pledge at the hand of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Coming to my fourth point here, and that is the question here I'm asking, was there a specific condition put in the pledge that they made with Rasulullah? Yes, there was a specific condition in the pledge that these Sahaba would faithfully defend the Prophet, and specifically that they will not run away from the battlefield. I'm not being a sectarian here. I'm not, trying to put anyone down. I'm talking about history. For example, Al-Bukhari, in his Sahih, he quotes Salama bin Akwa, where he was asked, "Ala ayyi shay'in kuntum tuba'i'una yawma idhin?" He was asked that, what was the condition on which you were pledging the allegiance on that day? And his response was, "Ala al-maut." We gave the pledge of allegiance for death. Means, Rasulullah, we will support you till our death. We will not abandon you. Al-Bayhaqi, another historian and muhaddis, is quoting Urwa, another Sahabi, where he says, فَبَايَعُوهُ عَلَىٰ أَنْ لَا يَفِرُّوا عَبَدًا. Very clear that they did the pledge of allegiance with Rasulullah with the condition that they will never ever run away from the battlefield. And la yafirru abada. They will not abandon him in a battle. Muslim in his Sahih Muslim actually quotes Jabir, one of the companions, famous one, where he actually has a different take on this issue. He says, لم نبايع رسول الله على الموت, that we did not do the bay'at that we will fight till death for him. إنما بايعناه على أن لا نفر, rather we did the pledge with Rasulullah that we would not run away from the battlefield. So when you look at all these different narrations, and I'm just giving you 3 samples here from Sunni sources, the least as far as unanimity is concerned is that the main condition of this pledge of Hudaybiya was that the Sahaba will not run away from the battlefield. And if they do that, then they have broken that pledge, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ridha and pleasure will no more be with them. This was the 4th point. Let me now come to the 5th point here, and which is a question again. So did the Sahaba fulfill their pledge after Sulh Hudaybiyah, or did something happen later on after this event that they broke their pledge? And then again, I'm not going to history first, I'll go to the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. The Qur'an is witness that almost all the Sahaba broke the pledge of not running away from the battlefield in the Battle of Hunain. Battle of Hunain was fought just 2 years after Bay'atul Ridwan. So Bay'atul Ridwan took place in the 6th year of the Hijrah. Fatih Makkah happened in the 8th year of the Hijrah, and soon after Fatih Makkah, Rasulullah with the Muslims, including the Muslims from Mecca in about 12,000 numbers, went basically to fight this battle with the opponents who were in Hunain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually in Surah Tawbah, ayat number 25, talks about this battle of Hunain, and he says, لَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي مَوَاطِنٍ كَثِيرًا, that certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped you in many places. وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ, and even on the day of Hunain, إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ, when your great numbers impressed you, because now they were not just few hundreds, they were 12,000 force among the Muslims. فَلَمْ تُغْنِ عَنْكُمْ شَيْئًا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, but that number that you had, 12,000 soldiers, did not avail you in any way. You became arrogant. وَزَاقَتْ عَلَيْكُمُ الْأَرْضُ بِمَا رَحُبَتْ, and the earth became too narrow for you in spite of its vastness. ثُمَّ وَلَّيْتُمْ مُدْبِرِينَ, and whereupon you turned your back to the battlefield, you started running away from the battlefield. Mudbirin means, to show your back to the event. Historians and scholars of hadith very clearly state that in the Battle of Hunain, from 12,000 Muslim fighters, vast majority of them ran away from the battlefield. Those who were steadfast were less than 10 in number. Actually, the names that we have reaches only to 7. Ali bin Abi Talib was there. Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet, was there. Fazl bin Abbas was there. Sufyan bin al-Harith bin Abdul Muttalib was there. Rabi'a bin al-Harith was there. Ayman bin Ubaidullah was there. Osama bin Zayd was there, and there was another person. And when this majority of the Sahaba started running away, the Prophet called his uncle Abbas, who was still with him. He said, why don't you announce very loudly to call these people back? And what are the words that the uncle of the Prophet used as instructed by Rasulullah? Ya ma'ashar al-muhajirin wal-ansar, O the people of Muhajirin and Ansar, those who migrated from Mecca to Medina and those who were inhabitants of Medina. Ya ashab bay'at al-shajara, O the people of bay'at al-shajara, referring to the bay'at of Hudaybiya. Ya ashab bay'at al-shajara, ila ayna tufirrun, where are you running to? Haza Rasulullah, Rasulullah is here. So we see very clearly the Muslim historians, the Sunni historians themselves, very clearly saying that the majority of these Sahaba, vast majority of them, ran away. They fled from the battlefield in the Battle of Hunayn. And when they did that, they broke their allegiance that they had formed with Rasulullah in Hudaibiya. And according to ayat number 10 of Surah 48, Surah Fath, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ نَكَثَ فَإِنَّمَا يَنْكُثُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. So whoever violates that condition, that pledge, then he is doing this out of his own detriment. And so these Sahaba who were there, majority of them who were also Ashab al-Bay'at al-Shajara, they basically are no more included in the rida and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they violated the condition which was there in Bay'atul Ridwan. The final and the sixth point that I have here, from Bukhari again, in Sahih Bukhari, where he is quoting Al-Musayyib. Al-Musayyib was from the second generation. He met Al-Bara bin Azib, a companion of the Prophet, and when he met him, he actually made a good remark about him, and he said, "Tuba laka, صحبت النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وبايعته تحت الشجرة." You indeed are fortunate. You were in the company of the Prophet, and you pledged your allegiance to him under the tree, referring to the Bay'at Ridwan or Bay'at Shajara in Hudaybiya. Al-Bara bin Azib now says, and this is after the demise of the Prophet, he says, "Ya ibn akhi, O my nephew, إنك لا تدري ما أحدثنا بعده." You do not know what we had done after that. So it means that even you have this confession from a Sahabi that they violated the condition which was there in the Bay'atul Ridwan. And with such a confession of a Sahabi, all these points that I mentioned about this ayat from Surah Al-Fath, this should be sufficient to shatter the myth that all the Sahaba were udul and adil and upright in their character just because of their companionship with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.